We are recording with Tomer Strolight. Am I saying your last name properly?
Yeah.
Strolight. And I think Tomer is here on a Monday when we have our sales team meeting. He's getting a vibe of the office. And I showed him the Bitcoin white paper that we have framed in the middle of our... I'm only laughing because it's somewhat ridiculous that we have the Bitcoin white paper. But that's...
It's almost like a religious text, right? It's a tome, and you have it front and center. So it makes perfect sense. That's the only place... If you're going to have it, you're going to put it in the center.
Yeah, it seemed like it was fitting, and it was a gift. The poster was a gift. So it's the Bitcoin white paper in poster format, and it was a gift from Greg Foss.
Nice.
And we got it framed.
Nice.
And then we hung it there. So it's just an honor to have you here. And I think the reason I'm thrilled to talk to you is because I feel like you're one person who maybe can understand where I'm coming from, because I think a lot of people think maybe I'm a little crazy when it comes to Bitcoin, because we were just talking about this, that I think it's probably one of the, I don't even think it's probably, it's outside of my family, my wife and my children, it's the most important thing that I've come across in my life. Yeah. And so when I can't shut up about it, and when we have our Your Life, Your Terms events, our bigger message, Tomer, is your life, your terms. You don't want to become a landlord. You're trying to live your life on your terms. Yeah. Bitcoin fits so perfectly with our bigger message that I can't stop talking about it, because I feel like it offers intellectual depth to people's lives. I feel like it offers financial freedom.
Sure.
And I guess I'm curious, like when you hear me talk this way, what comes to mind for you? Do you think I'm crazy?
I'm
what a ridiculous question.
This guy's like 10% in. Like for me, I remember like coming up, you mentioned that we were both in Miami for New Year's Eve. And so we were getting together with other Bitcoiners before the big $100,000 party at Michael Saylor's estate. And as we were talking over dinner the night before, I was like, for me, discovering Bitcoin was like, oh, this is, I didn't fully understand it when I first came across it, but I knew deep down inside, this is what I've been searching for my whole life. I was looking for this sense of justice. I was born in Israel, and we came to Canada when I was 5 years old, and my dad was into money. He was like an accountant and, like a financial person back in those days before highfalutin finances in the 1970s. And so he had explained, and Israel had gone through one of these currency devaluations. The lira had become a shekel, and the shekel had become a new shekel. And basically what that meant was they kept adding zero.
The standard play.
Yeah, like the lira became a shekel, which was 10 liras, and then the shekel became a new shekel, which is like 1,000 shekels. I can't remember the exact story of it because I was just a little kid, but I knew even when I was like in junior high school or grade school that governments print money and devalue the currency, and something struck me as not fair about that. Right? Like that's not fair. If I have money and then somebody says it's worth a lot less, even if they're doing it to everybody, why do they get to do this? So somewhere in my memory, in the 1970s, was this search for Bitcoin began. I of course didn't know it was Bitcoin, but I was also always into computers, and I was into science fiction, and then I got into business. I did 2 degrees in business, and I was working. I had a career that was over 20 years long, trying to work my way up the corporate ladder, make a living for my family. And then 2008 came around, and it was just shocking to me what would happen. It was the real estate crisis, the great financial crisis, the money printing crisis. And I remember thinking at that time, maybe I should just buy gold. Everything that's going on in the world seems so unfair. I saw, the banks get bailed out. They should have failed. They should have been punished. Instead, those bankers got huge bonuses. And meanwhile, I was working away and seeing all of my value sucked away through all sorts of other unjust things that were going on at the company that I was working at and the industry that I was working at. And I didn't really know what to do about it. I was really, really disgusted. I ended up in 2012 quitting my career just out of disillusionment, thinking it would be easy to reboot it, thinking that my reputation and my knowledge was enough. And things went kind of rocky. And then it was in 2013 that I first heard about Bitcoin. And it was from a friend who I hadn't met in person until only a couple of years ago, actually, but it was an online friend who said, have you heard about this thing, Bitcoin? it's like this internet money that exists only on the internet, and it was invented by somebody that nobody knows who they are, and that person's disappeared, and there's a white paper. And so he sent me the white paper. He told me where to read it, and I read the white paper, and I didn't fully understand it all, but I knew I was just like I'd come in contact with something profound.
At that moment, you knew.
I never had the phase of skepticism. I had this phase of incredible curiosity and learning, like fascination. What's a digital signature? I didn't know what a digital signature was at the time. I didn't know what a hash function was. I knew a little bit of what peer-to-peer software was because we all shared music.
Napster.
Yeah, like so it's like you download music, but I didn't understand what distributed consensus was, and that's what this was using peer-to-peer for. It wasn't I download one song. It's like we all download the entire library.
And you were at a unique time because you'd already you were already through 2008. You had already quit your job, so your state of mind was open and searching and looking for something. So it kind of found you at the right time.
At this point in my career, I was actually working in private equity, looking for digital investments for Power.
So you were still working at that moment.
Yeah, I was working at a different company than where I had been, and I was looking for digital investments, but mostly in the media space because I was working for the media division of Power Corporation, and I had partnered with them in the previous part of my career. So we were making some interesting investments, although they were now pivoting towards wanting to harvest those investments and use them to sustain their failing traditional media enterprise. And when I came across Bitcoin, I was still new. I wasn't even sure that there were 21 million or 22 million. It was a lot of the basics I was still learning, but I was trying to explain, like, wow, if you're a financial company, this is potentially the most disruptive thing to finance that's ever come across, because it threatens to disrupt the issuance of the currency. But it was so radical that I really couldn't even get a conversation on it. And I was just at the time, like, Bitcoin had been almost 1,000, crashed back down to 650, and was on its way down to 250. And I was just, why don't we put $1 million into it? Like, all of our other investments are 7 million, 10 million, 15 million. Why don't we just put
Take a flyer on this thing?
$1 million, at 250 a Bitcoin. It's 4 for every 1,000 times that would have been 4,000 Bitcoin that at today's prices would be worth $400 million, which is still actually not that much money to a company like Power Financial.
Sure.
But, it's
a lot of money. It's a lot of money to me and you.
Yeah, and I'm not second guessing them but the context was just so radical that it resonated deeply with me as someone who had experienced trauma several times in their lives about money and everything that's wrong with it, and didn't resonate at all for people who the money system had rewarded incredibly well. And they're like, why would you want to disrupt this perfect system that's turned us all into billionaires, right? But it didn't turn us all into billionaires. It turned some people into billionaires, and it left others wrecked. So no, I don't think you're crazy, or if you are, like, we're both, you're less crazy than I am, right? Like I'm all in, not just financially. I'm all in spiritually. I'm all in with my time. I'm all in with my career and what I want to dedicate myself to. Like,
what is that? Because I think a lot of people are looking to put more of themselves into the world of Bitcoin, and there's people listening to this that I know listen to this regularly who want to step further in to the world of Bitcoin. Like, they're in a career. I know them. I know if they're listening to this, I know that they're hearing that and wondering, how are you in further? Like, what does it mean to be in spiritually, for example?
Sure.
Like, how have you taken these steps where you can walk around saying, I'm all in where you are?
Well, there's a lot of dimensions to it. And so they might each individually sound crazy. And then when you put them all together, they'll either sound sane or they'll sound like completely unhinged. So one part of it is, what kind of an organization is Bitcoin? Well, it's not a company, right? It has no leader. It doesn't have an HR department. So if you want to work for Bitcoin isn't hiring. There's no HR, and you don't have to go in for an interview. You decide what you want to do for Bitcoin, and you do it. And if it adds value, then Bitcoin becomes enriched. Bitcoin becomes more successful. Maybe there's a way that it adds value to you personally, like in the sense of you're running a business and people are paying you to do it. But generally speaking, all of us who are in Bitcoin are raising the value of Bitcoin by contributing to it. So it's important that you own shares in this entity, which are Bitcoin, the lowercase Bitcoin. And if you buy as much Bitcoin as you can and continue to accumulate as much Bitcoin as you can, and you're doing things in the world that increase the value of Bitcoin, you're increasing your wealth at the same time. So you are exchanging goods for goods. And I remember I really wanted to get, like, breaking through that barrier of thought was hard for me. Like, I heard about Bitcoin in 2013. I really wanted to work in Bitcoin, get a job in Bitcoin. Like, my whole life is like, you become skilled and then you sell your time and skill to some company that pays you a salary or a commission or something in exchange for the skill that you have. But Bitcoin wasn't hiring, and it never will be. And it was around 2020 when I found myself literally out of a job because of COVID and everything else, but fascinated about Bitcoin and wanting to start a podcast and wanting to start writing about it. Then it occurred to me, you know, if I take care of Bitcoin, Bitcoin will take care of me. And that's the most that I can do. Bitcoin will probably take care of me even if I don't take care of Bitcoin, but I believe in reciprocity. And Bitcoin is this very strange entity that we'll get to some other crazy ideas that I have maybe a little bit later, but I felt like I could strike a deal with Bitcoin and that it would honor it. And so I basically threw caution to the wind and I said, if I take care of Bitcoin, Bitcoin will take care of me. And I started writing.
So here, I'll pick up on the writing part, but you're saying something there that's kind of resonating pretty deeply with me, because sometimes I think of my life and I think the outer reflection of my world today is deeply connected to my inner beliefs and my inner choices and my inner feelings. Yeah. So it's a representation of what's inside of me. And sometimes I just kind of think about, I'll read some stuff in physics and quantum physics and, what are we really here? Is there a table really, like, what is happening? Are we really in the simulation, or what is happening? Yeah. But I can kind of conclude or come to my own life saying the best things that happen to me are a series of good decisions. If I make good decisions, good things happen. And it seems to me that my unconscious and perhaps the world, it's almost like my subconscious wants me to make good decisions, and I can make them in a lot of areas in my life. But in the area of finance, I feel like what Bitcoin brings is it brings the ability for me to make good decisions, because in all other areas of finance, because it's based on a manipulated currency that in itself is not truth, there's no real there's zero value there. It's fabricated out of thin air. It's a form of theft, in my opinion. Bitcoin then brings order and truth to this other area of my life. Like, I can make good choices when it comes to family, relationships, business in general. Right. But when it comes to finance, like savings, it was difficult to make continued good choices because, when you go and buy a rental property, you're creating M2. That M2 money supply that you're creating when you go to buy that rental property for your family is actually debasing the currency, the purchasing power of everyone else around you. Sure. So even when you're trying to make good decisions in a manipulated area, you can't. And Bitcoin kind of brings that back.
Well, I think if I put that idea as concisely as I can in my own terms, I have 2 degrees that I took in business, finance, economics, strategy. And so I understand the whole academic view, the whole theoretical view of finance, and it is very badly broken. Keynesianism, which informs macroeconomics, is very badly broken. All of macroeconomics is really badly broken, and all sorts of things in finance make presumptions that rely on things like the risk-free rate of money, which isn't really risk-free. It's the expansion, it's the rate at which the bank is expanding the money supply, so they'll give it to you for free because that's what it costs to just hold your money. So there's all sorts of broken things.
Unique person that you can understand all these concepts, but beautifully said. Keep going.
And so again, one of my other sort of traumas through in my life as it relates to money was sitting in 3 years of business school, listening to all these theories and just raising my hand over and over and saying, but this doesn't make sense, but that doesn't make sense. And it's like, well, look, if you accept that income is a function of income, then Keynesianism makes sense. And so, but this theory literally states that people digging holes is not my idea. People digging holes, paying them to dig holes and paying other people to fill those holes back in creates economic value. And clearly there's nothing created. There's something created that's of no value, and then it's destroyed. And so you have the situation that you were in before, and you're claiming that we're better off as a society, and clearly we're not, right? We've just wasted people's energy. So there's got to be something wrong with this theory, can we work on formulating the correct theory? But then you see Bitcoin, and Bitcoin is a self-contained system built on a few premises to enforce this idea of justice and fairness and rationality, right? And it's an idea of fairness that doesn't say everyone gets equal rewards. It's an idea that says the rules are very clear and they don't change, and the rules apply equally to everyone. No one gets to change the rules. No one gets to set the rules. And the deeper you get into Bitcoin, the more you realize that in this other system, there are rules, but there aren't really any rules. The rules are, there's people who get to change the rules whenever they want to if they screw up, right? So the rules are all there. There's all this pomp and circumstance around banks, and they get charters because that's a very special thing, and they're only allowed to lend against their fractional reserves and this and that. There's all these rules, and then they screw up and they die. So we changed the rules and they're all alive. So there were no rules. There were no rules, and this is the right. But it's only special people who get the special privilege. And oftentimes, if other people are wrecked, it's like, well, we'll give you these COVID.
We'll send you a check.
Yeah, we'll send you a check. But you have no idea the size of the check that we're sending to these other guys dwarfs it, and
you should thank us.
Yeah, and you should thank us. We're giving you $200 now. That, by the way, won't buy a bag of groceries in 2 years' time. In the meantime, we're sending $1 trillion somebody else's way, and that will buy, everything that you can't buy going forward. So there's a fairness, there's a justice inside of Bitcoin. It treats it's a peer-to-peer system. There's only one class of user of Bitcoin, and that's a peer. You can do what you want as a peer, or you can be negligent in your responsibilities, and then it's only you who ends up suffering if you're negligent in your responsibilities. But that was one of the things that really started to attract me into Bitcoin and say that, there's something special here because there's a system that is man-made, but is outside the control of man. Man has finally created something, and this is where it starts to get really profound. Man has created something that's out of man's control. It's almost like, you create a virus in a lab and you release it,
living,
and now it's out. Yeah, now it's out there, and you can't rein it back in. You need to figure, and this is not virulent and makes you ill. It's the antithesis of that. It's healthy and makes society healthy, and gives us a power that we deserve, that by all rights, by all sense of morality, if you think that individuals should have rights, this grants rights to individuals that consistently were violated by the financial services industry and politics, which are like one gargantuan beast put together. So I was really drawn to Bitcoin for this fairness, on this moral case, and the moral case for Bitcoin emerges from the technical case that is, well, it can't be inflated, it can't be stolen, it can't be censored, it's available to everyone in the world, no matter what their race, religion, location, gender, sexual ideology, whatever. It treats everyone equally, just like our governments say our governments do and our societies do, but fail to. All right. And so Bitcoin doesn't fail where every other institution in the world does in treating everybody equally. And that's incredibly valuable. And so,
So you're saying it's unstoppable, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I'm just going to summarize the way I hear you is say, to me, I'm hearing it's unstoppable. It's out into the world in and of itself. It's kind of this living, breathing thing almost that's out there.
Yeah.
What does it, like, I'm now envisioning this is a wrecking ball in maybe the best possible way, but there's going to be like repercussions from this into the current manipulation that's going on in the world. Right. And it seems like it's on the path to perhaps bring a higher and more just sense of life and prosperity to everyone.
I think
are we on that path?
Yes.
Are we in the wrecking ball moment now with Bitcoin?
I don't want to call it a wrecking ball because a wrecking ball...
I kind of like the wrecking ball, just like we're just breaking that up.
Well, the wrecking ball suggests... I think what's broken about the wrecking ball mentality is that a wrecking ball comes and destroys something that's in its way, whereas Bitcoin...
That's kind of my approach sometimes, I got to admit. So I'm a little bit of a wrecking ball guy.
Bitcoin is more an exit to a new frontier, right? Like it doesn't...
That's the nice...
Bitcoin isn't coming and tearing tearing it down. It's not forcing. It's not forcing anybody here to become a Bitcoiner. No. It's a completely voluntary.
It's a peaceful movement.
Yeah, exactly. It's a completely voluntary exit into a world where your rights are protected, where your financial rights are protected.
And that's the nicer way to say it, Tomer. I'm going to agree with you.
And so, like, I think it leads to not to the wreckage of the old system, but to the abandonment of the old system. People will leave gradually at different people at different times. Interestingly enough, Bitcoin really appeals initially to the people who are most offended by, whose rights are most offended by the traditional system, and it's most despised by the people who get special privileges from the existing financial system. There's no surprise there, right? The incentives drive behavior and they drive perception. Like, it's hard for somebody to see that something that they're involved in is unjust, especially when the injustice is so complicated and convoluted, and it looks like the rules that everybody's been playing by for thousands of years. So people just accept, political pull is a valid strategy to deploy in one's life, even if that pull is getting special privilege for yourself at the expense of others. And it's immoral, it's wrong, but many people believe in it. And, you take a look at the size of the lobbying industry, like, everybody practices this. Mm-hmm. But go ahead and hire a lobbyist to try to change Bitcoin. It's like they can't get a meeting with the CEO of Bitcoin. If they try to put something out there in the form of a proposed change to Bitcoin, well, all the Bitcoiners who care about Bitcoin as a fair and just system that treats everyone equally and isn't prone to censorship and control and manipulation are going to be the ones who evaluate that proposal. So if you're trying to do something that benefits your client at the expense of the rest of the community, or at the expense of anyone really, the Bitcoin community says, take your idea and leave. Good luck with it. Feel free to hard fork and create your own coin or do whatever you want. And many people have, of course, done that, right? And
I guess that is kind of how humans do work, because I was in Montreal in the fall, and I was struck by this beautiful building that was their old post office.
Yeah.
And what a meaningful building that obviously was for that community to build a building like that. Yeah. And then over time, like in the 90s, it's used less and less as email starts getting out, and then there's email attachments as the bandwidth of the internet grows, and then there's you're not just sending emails anymore, you're sending video messages and FaceTime.
Yeah.
And so your communication just went away, and those buildings are largely abandoned, even used for other purposes. I was in Collingwood, Ontario, and there's a beautiful building there that was clearly a post office before, and now it's just being used as like a passport renewal location. And there's this beautiful structure. And I guess what you're saying is the way humans do behave. There's one system, technology comes and maybe offers something different, maybe better. People kind of just leave that, and there's early adopters of email, which maybe I was fairly early in the 90s, and then there's the late adopters, but eventually just more and more people kind of get pulled over to the better solution. And I guess that's what Bitcoin's likely going to do, now that I hear you say it. Like, it's early adopters dive in early, and everyone else kind of comes along over time. And before we know it, we're all operating on this new system.
Hey everyone, I wanted to quickly share my personal journey with the Rockstar Inner Circle. I joined Rockstar when I was 23 years old because I wanted to learn how to invest in real estate, and I was looking for the right people to guide me. What I didn't expect was how much more the Inner Circle would give me. It's not just about investing, it's about being a part of a community that is genuinely invested in each other's success. I've learned so much here, from real estate strategies to understanding the economy, personal finance, and how the whole money system works. I've gained the knowledge to build my own business, create my own assets, and leverage the biggest trends in the world. But more than that, it's the growth mindset and personal development that have transformed how I approach life and investing. Having a community of like-minded people to share wisdom, experiences, and lessons with has been invaluable. From finding tenants and growing a real estate portfolio to designing the life you want, it's been a game changer. Being part of the Inner Circle has completely changed my perspective on money and life. The insights I've gained have helped me make smarter decisions, and I'm now way more confident in my financial future. If you're ready to level up your investing, mindset, and your life, I can't recommend the Rockstar Inner Circle enough. It's not just a membership, it's an opportunity to design the life you want. Thanks for letting me share this with you, and I hope to see you in the Inner Circle soon. If you're curious to learn more, feel free to check out rockstarinnercircle.com/get-started for free resources and see if it's the right fit for you. Now back to the show.
I guess I just feel like, is that really going to happen? Like, because it's finance, and it's because it's the world of money.
Yeah.
It seems...
Well, take a look. Like, if even a year ago,
Yeah.
we were having this conversation, you would be much more aggressive towards me and this idea, and you'd be saying, look, the government's trying to shut down Bitcoin left, right, and center. They're putting banks who are friendly to Bitcoin out of business with Operation Choke Point, and so Bitcoin's in for a really tough ride because it's not like other industries where people chose to not use the post office and instead use email. It's like how do people choose not to use banks when Bitcoin is made illegal and it's not, and the government's getting in the way? But here we are a year later, and it looks like a SAB 121 is repealed, Operation Choke Point is gone. There's an opportunity for Bitcoin to rise above the surface, get out from being underground, and it may last a very long time, it may not, but the lesson that we keep learning is however long this takes, it's only moving in one direction, which is more progress for Bitcoin. And the more that Bitcoin gets attacked by entities like the government or some government, right? There's the government, there's branches of many governments, but the more it gets attacked by powerful forces, the lesson it teaches everybody is those powerful forces are unable to stop Bitcoin. They're unable to change Bitcoin. They're unable to take your Bitcoin. And so it's like this thing, again, this man-made thing rises above even the most powerful, what we thought were the most powerful institutions that man has. And I think this is where really the spiritual element of Bitcoin happens, because we grow up in our Western secular society, and this is my Western analysis of this, not in other cultures, but we grow up in this secular society that teaches us a number of really cynical things on its pride, right? It says, well, scientists have figured out just about everything there is to figure out. They understand the universe extremely well. We've got medicine, surgery, the pills that you can take. You think you can take a pill for everything. And, we learn, well, all these pills that they prescribe don't actually cure everything. There may be a little bit in the profit motivation of the pharmaceutical industry more than they are at healing us. And we're also taught in schools that public education and the schooling system is the right way to educate a human being. And we're taught that the government issues money, and we're taught that the government is benevolent and acts in our interest. And we're taught as we get older that really big and powerful corporations and businessmen control a lot of power. And so we end up in this world where we think that there are very, very powerful entities, and we're also taught that people are selfish, that they are, there have been great humans, perhaps divine, in history who were exceptions to the case, but people do things for money, power, and fame. And then if you discover Bitcoin and you hear its story, it's like, well, hold on a minute. It's all of these ideas, like Bitcoin shatters all of them. Bitcoin solves a technical problem that experts and scientists said could not be solved. This thing called the Byzantine generals problem. There's a proof that it can't be solved in theory, but Satoshi comes along with a solution that solves it in practice, and it works. And it's part of Bitcoin, and governments can't stop it. Okay, well, so there goes so what experts said it couldn't be done, we shatter that belief. Governments should stop it, but they can't stop it. So there goes that belief that governments can stop anything that gets in their way, right? Like they couldn't stop the COVID virus either. They couldn't stop marijuana either. So let's check our premises. But they certainly can't stop Bitcoin. We learn, and the more we study it, the more we understand why. And corporations can't take it over. Facebook tries to launch Libra. They get a consolidated, whatever you call it, team of Visas in it, MasterCards in it, American Expresses in it, Chase Morgan, all these big things. And there was also R3. There were all these different entities created, and none of them can create a substitute for Bitcoin that even launches, let alone overwhelms it. So corporation, and no corporate insider can take it over. Elon Musk invests $1 billion in it through Tesla, and then tries to make changes to it, and Bitcoiners tell him that they will die on this hill and he will not make any changes to Bitcoin. They say GFY to him, the same way he said GFY to the media more recently.
Swear and say whatever you want.
Okay, well, I don't know your audience. There might be kids listening.
Yeah.
So we realize, this thing, corporations and very powerful businessmen can't control everything, can't take over everything. And then we hear about Satoshi, and he didn't do it for the fame, because we don't know who he is. He didn't do it for the power, because he gave up all the power in leaving the Bitcoin community. He didn't do it for the money. He never spent even one of his Bitcoins. He sent some in a test transaction back and forth with Hal, and that's all we know of several. So all of these things that I just described as these cynical beliefs that make us feel hopeless about things, or they make us feel like you're either a victim or a victimizer, they're all shattered by the story of Bitcoin and the existence of Bitcoin. And Bitcoin then represents a substitute that says,
it seems to be raising the consciousness of everyone.
Yeah.
It seems like it's big. When I hear you describe it that way, it's like, holy smokes, this is changing everything, because it's just raising the consciousness level or the energy level of everybody.
Yeah. Well, it says that there's a fair game to be played here, and that there are pursuits that aren't frivolous, right? Like the pursuit isn't power. The pursuit isn't money. Like the pursuit isn't a pursuit of your control over somebody else.
You can focus on your highest and best use in the community, in the society, and you will be rewarded for it, and your savings will go up in value, so you can live off of that.
Right. And so it's a victimless mentality. And one of the things that all of these myths that we're raised to believe is this myth that there are good guys and bad guys, and that the good guys finish last, right? There's a big part of that has really poisoned our society and poisoned the philosophy of people growing up. So they're like, either, well, you know what, I'm going to be a good person, and I accept that I'm going to therefore as a result be poor, be taken advantage of, be miserable, be depressed, whatever. And then there are other people who say, well, I'm not going to let that happen to me. I'm going to do unto others before they do unto me.
I never thought about it that way. Yeah.
And so it's a really cynical thing in our civilization.
It kind of allows you to be a good person and understand that being a good person, you can get ahead for yourself.
And why should that?
And I don't mean get ahead against other people. I just mean you can have a savings. You could have purchasing power protected for your family.
And when you think about this observation, like from a spiritual perspective, or like, this would be what people who are religious say, well, this is the devil's Satan's infiltration of our morality. It says, like, you ought to be evil because that's the only way you get ahead in this world. And there's, and there's different philosophers and different people who've said different things, but when you live in this world, you actually see a lot of examples of, the guy who cheated getting ahead, the guy who, and you don't see that much sense of justice. And you look at the games that people play to get in power and you say, I don't want to play those games. But I'm certainly affected by the power of the individuals in power over me. So it's like, what do I do? Do I just accept that there are people? And Bitcoin comes in and says, at least in this realm, and it's a very important realm because it's the realm of all your money, in the realm of everything that you've earned and tried to store, you have protection from this. And so you can live in a world where you are not required to either exploit somebody to develop some power over them that they would wish you didn't exercise, nor live in a world where other people are exercising a power over you that you don't think that they deserve. Again, the equality of the rules, basically, Bitcoin makes it so you can't steal either directly or through inflation or through counterfeiting. And so this is the thou cannot steal invention, not thou should not steal, because people break the commandments all the time. But when you can't break the commandment, you create a justice that is the benefit of everyone obeying it.
Why do you think Bitcoin emerged at this time? Do you ever think about that? Why did it come out at this? Like, I know Satoshi Nakamoto, the different technologies that were around, and he kind of merged them all together, however we're going to describe that. But sometimes I think, like, why did this come around at this time? Was this something bigger? Like, it is. Yeah.
I mean, like, it's one of the story of Bitcoin is one of the greatest mysteries of all time. And it's a modern mystery, right?
Yeah,
not like who built the pyramids.
That's what it is, a modern...
Who built the pyramids 5,000 years ago? It's like, who made Bitcoin 16 years ago? It's here. It's more
2009.
It's more indestructible than the pyramids.
Yeah, exactly.
It uses these mind-boggling technologies. It's everywhere. And it came seemingly at just the right time. So, there's all kinds of interesting theories, and
what are yours?
There's a lot of people who think I'll paint out like three possibilities, two of which are arguably crazy, right? But
I'm all in for the crazy. I'm all in for the crazy.
So I'll save the crazy for. I'll save the best for last. I'll save the crazy. The first is, look, it was coming anyways. This is
okay, sure.
This is a convergence of technologies
evolution.
that were already and given
cryptography, proof of work, all starting to merge together.
Hash functions, digital signatures. Like what's really interesting is Satoshi basically MacGyvered together.
It feels that way. Yeah,
a few things. This thing called digital signatures, which are your ability to verify your possession of a private key with only a public key. That's and sign a message saying that, and that's what a Bitcoin transaction
existed before Bitcoin.
It exists. Yeah, it existed. It kind of came about in the late 70s. It's a very modern discovery within mathematics and became scalable. In the early 2000s and usable amongst different people thanks to the internet. Right. So we needed the internet to be there. There's the peer-to-peer technology, which we all first discovered with file sharing for music and pirated games and apps. But music was the first home run thing. So he took some of those things and bound them together. And the last thing was he did some really cool things with these hash functions, which are digests of content. And there's an application of it to proof of work. So he really managed to figure out how to put these things together and to create this decentralized money at a time when the world was really clamoring for it, because the financial system was visibly to many people failing, and in fact arguably had failed and been bailed out a couple of times.
I feel like it's in a zombie state now.
And there's something really rotten about it, really. And I don't mean it's rotten people, although there probably are some very rotten people in there, but I mean, like,
but there's good
it's
people
like
in
it's
there
like
too.
it's like an apple that's gone bad and it's too late to save it, and
we're trying to preserve it.
It's rotting for all sorts of reasons, and the corruption and this has spread into the institutions of our government, but I'm going sideways now because you're asking why did it come at the time that it did. So you've got this notion of the technologies were available and the need was available, and so the technologies got put together to solve a need, and it happened. But it didn't have to happen with all of this amazing story and mystery behind it. It could have been somebody named Joe put it together, and they didn't put a cap on it, and they didn't have a proof of work mechanism, and they didn't they might have invented it in some kind of way, but that it wasn't a mystery as to who invented it, and they might have made
and they
money
were taking ownership of it.
And they could have tried to steer it, which is what you see with every other altcoin, right? Like take a look at the number 2 coin, Ethereum. We know who created it. We know that they're still in charge of it. They keep making changes to it, and so it loses that magic of a system without rulers who change the rules. It's in fact a system with rulers who keep changing the rules and have done so dozens of times.
It's like a tech company more than anything else.
So I think this, people call it like what's the term? What's it? Like a divine
intervention,
an immaculate conception.
Immaculate conception.
That's the
yeah. I've heard it. Yes, yeah.
This thing was born in such an immaculate way, with Satoshi leaving and not keeping any of the money for himself. Not
the origin story is just wild.
Yeah. So when you get to that origin story, I mean, some people hear the immaculate conception or some other version of the story, and they say, "Wow, this is certainly following in the footsteps of divine inspiration, or perhaps divine itself." Right? Like, wow, that this thing came at the time that it did.
It's hard not to at least consider it.
I agree, and I think there's many people who've found religion first studying Bitcoin really first appeals to people who are computer scientists, engineers, and that's a realm of people who are very secularized, right? Who very much are atheists or agnostic at least, and don't have time for these stories. And then they hear this story, and this story, and they verify every aspect of it with their mathematical genius and training, and they're like, wow, this is really extraordinary, and maybe there's something divine going on. And then I have one article that I wrote that I was, it's like, well, maybe aliens gave it to me.
Yeah, right? I remember that article.
I have an article called why people wonder if Bitcoin is alien technology. And it's like, this technology does not just one thing or two things. It does like a number of things, like 4 or 5 different things that no other technology before it did. Like Bitcoin is this self-replicating technology. It's like it makes, you spin up a node and it makes a perfect replica of all the other nodes, and it does so in a way that's very alien. Like it checks with all the other nodes, and then they make decisions together, by checking the rule system. And so it's not just self-replicating of a static structure; it's self-replicating of an adapting structure. This append-only blockchain. Wow. So like nothing else has ever done that before, and it self-adjusts. Like you can't go in and adjust and maintain Bitcoin, but that's okay because it's self-maintaining. It has this difficulty adjustment, so it looks inward into itself over every 2-week period and says, did this thing
what should
happen?
I change?
Yeah. How much harder do I make this? How much stuff? So it's self-governing. And it's built to last forever, right? Like all these computer programs, we had the Y2K bug.
Yeah.
And it was like,
I remember working on that at the bank. I was at the bank working on it.
Right. Like human programmers didn't think 30 years ahead or 20 years ahead. And along comes this Satoshi who abandons the project, but creates the thing so that it's got a database structure that can expand to infinity. It's got a user base structure, like the space of user identities is the space of all private keys, which is bigger than bigger than all the atoms a bigger number than all the atoms in the universe. So it's so mind-bogglingly big. Like who over-engineers something to last for billions of years without maintenance and builds it so that it self-maintains? It sounds like an alien technology. It's like, this ancient alien technology came in a spaceship, and the spaceship, because people could die on it and generations would pass and all this stuff, it was built to maintain itself, and it was built to adjust itself, and it was built to house people for, like not just for the generation that departed in the ship, but for hundreds and thousands of generations afterwards. And Bitcoin meets all of these criteria, and why would somebody build something like this? So is it alien technology, and what was the intent behind it? And whether you entertain these ideas or not, literally, it's so mind-boggling that it's more than just another invention of humanity. And I think that's what has so many people looking like crazy people.
Absolutely.
It's like they're so drawn.
You're mesmerized by it.
Yeah, you're so drawn into the exceptional capabilities of this thing. Here we've talked about so many of them. And it's beautiful, and it's so concise, right? It's not beautiful because it's built with all sorts of fancy ornamentation. It doesn't. It doesn't have a hood ornament or anything. Yeah. It's beautiful because it's so simplistic and lacking in ornamentation, right? It is just it sets out to do these things that it does, which is create just money for everybody in the world forever, for everyone who's yet to come, right? Like, there's our great grandkids will have their own public keys and their own private keys, and we don't have to worry about solving problems for them. And it does come with some challenges along the way, like we may or may not have to solve quantum resistance, and we may or may not have to solve some other little bug later on. We may or may not have to deal with what happens after all the bitcoins are emitted and released. But that's problems for future generations to solve in the context of their present and their outlook for the future. So Bitcoin really gets us looking out into the future rather than dwelling on the past. It's a new set of rules, and it shows that some amazing things are possible. And so I think you have this, Michael Saylor says Bitcoin is hope. You have this group of incredibly hopeful people whose hope is restored because they know they can work on long-term projects without getting the rug pulled out from under them. There's not going to be an adjustment that the dollar is now worth 1/10 of a dollar.
3 to 4 years of 100% inflation a year that just destroys you.
Yeah, that you're protected from all sorts of things.
That line you said that, like, if I take care of Bitcoin will take care of me. I feel like I've heard you say that. Maybe
I have said it before. Yeah.
It's such a great line. Was that a conscious decision into your writing? Is your writing? It is.
Yeah.
Okay,
so that was I had this really deep experience thinking about Bitcoin and realizing what it was, wondering if it was alien technology. That the other, asking if it's actually like a form of life, not biological life, but a process that, feeds off of energy and keeps growing and keeps expanding and keeps
like a consciousness. Sometimes I'm like, is this thing conscious?
Yeah. And I think Bitcoin has a higher layer of consciousness. I've written an article about that, which is really us acting as its neurons in a giant network. So
oh, cool. I have to read. I don't think I've read that one from you. I got to read that one.
How Bitcoin is like a giant cybernetic meta brain.
Maybe I have.
Yeah,
sometimes I've read a lot about this stuff. I don't know if some of the ideas I'm having are coming from you.
Yeah, which is okay, right? I think
are those all on your is that on Medium?
That'd be on my Medium.
Okay.
So you can add it to the show notes.
I will. I'll link to it.
It's a really it's my most scientific paper, even though it's talking about Bitcoin being conscious, because it compares how neurons in your head form a decentralized network of electrical impulses going back and forth to create your sense of consciousness. And then it just takes that abstract idea and says, well, you and me talking about Bitcoin is like two neurons sending signals back and forth to each other, and we're communicating with everybody else and following, and we're connected in the same way that neurons connect to one another, especially over social media. And so and then Bitcoin solves its own problems by using our brains to solve Bitcoin's problems. So you're actually becoming a part of the conscious mind of Bitcoin when you dedicate your mind to solving Bitcoin's problems.
That is mind blowing. Wow.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to dig up the article and read it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Take your time with it. It's a bit of a long piece, but
it's beautiful what you're saying. Like, I can see it. It's just wild.
Yeah.
It's like we are the physical manifestation of the Bitcoin network now interacting between each other here. It's kind of like we're this weird extension of it.
Well, this is how, the nodes aren't conscious.
No.
But the node runners are conscious, and the node runners are
talking to each other.
Decentralized, right? Like I said, in your brain, there's no central neuron. There's no leader of the neurons in your brain. I can take out any bunch of neurons and you'll still be you. But every additional neuron that's useful helps, and they establish these relationships. So I really try to compare the brain science of what we know about how brains work and how neurons network connect with one another. It's probably worth revisiting that article.
So then just on this, because I want to ask you about your writing then. So then when we were, we got a chance to see each other at Michael Saylor's party, and you see all those people there. Yeah. When you see Bitcoin evolving to the point that there's a party in Miami about the fiat dollar price of 100,000, what goes through Tomer's mind? Like, what are you like? Do you just reflect back in that moment and just say, yeah, this is the natural extension of what's happening, or does it? Is it a positive for you? Is it a negative for you? Like, what is it?
I think it's a moment of validation. Like it's not a. It's an interesting milestone. It's like a celebration, like a birthday party. To celebrate an achievement, a graduation.
But for you, it was inevitable that you were going to have some kind of party about something.
Well, party, and it's nice to celebrate, right? Like if you have a kid and they graduate from high school or they get a job.
Okay, so that's what it was.
Like we're celebrating Bitcoin's achievement. As measured by the rest of the world, right? The rest of the world, like Bitcoin didn't actually achieve anything within Bitcoin's realm because Bitcoin doesn't care about fiat. But for many of us who are straddling the world and migrating over to Bitcoin, choosing to exit, it was a very significant moment. It could have been, any price could have been significant. There's nothing special about 100,000, just a nice round number. But for us to be able to come and hold a celebration and say, Bitcoin achieved what would have been expected to be a very, very hard milestone. It did so before its 16th birthday. That's, so again, you're thinking of like a kid, right? And who kind of made it by the time that they were 16 towards one goal. And then you ask it, well, what's your ultimate goal? It's like, well, I want to bring freedom to everyone in the whole wide world and self-sovereignty and self-actualization to every human being in the world who wants it from me. I'm not forcing it on anyone. And it's like, wow, that's a really beautiful message. That's what I want to continue working towards. So I'm not sure where exactly.
No. We started down that path just because of your writing. So then why did you choose, obviously we have your book at the office. I kind of strategically keep it at the front of the office for anyone to bumble into the Why Bitcoin book, which is a beautiful book and illustrated so beautifully. Like sometimes I just look at the illustrations in your book and it's just so beautiful. Yeah. But now you've written, I forgot, I had known that you'd written a kid's book, but so where is this coming from? This is just the next thing for you?
Yeah.
Satoshi Nakamoto and his Bitcoin invention.
Yeah. So this is a kids book. I started writing, which became like I didn't know that this would be a book when I first started writing the articles that became the chapters in it. I was like, when I said I'm going to take care of Bitcoin and Bitcoin will take care of me, I was of the view I'm good at writing concisely.
Okay, got it.
And at that time there was Twitter, which was people writing 250 character memes, and it wasn't really explanatory, and really big essays like Robert Breedlove was writing and Gigi was writing, and I was really moved by those things. But I thought
the numbers
a lot of people don't have the patience to read this kind of stuff. They're not going to read the Bitcoin Standard. They might not even read Jeff Booth's Price of Tomorrow book. How do I? And there's so many great lessons about Bitcoin. How do I make them concise enough and frame them so that they answer people's questions? And this gimmicky idea came up in my mind that was like, well, why don't you have all these articles titled something with respect to why Bitcoin? Like, why is Bitcoin? Why does Bitcoin use energy? Why is Bitcoin? Why does it exist? Why is it so complicated?
Can nobody stop it?
Yeah. Why can't anybody stop it? So I started writing these articles. I tried to keep them all under like a 5-minute read, so 3 to 5 minutes. And I was just entering the Bitcoin space, and so I kind of wanted to impress my heroes, like those people we mentioned. And so I was like, I want these articles to be suitable for anybody, even newcomers. But I also wanted to provide something new, and at least a new angle for people who are really experienced in Bitcoin. That there's something that I contribute something back to them because they give back to me. And it was a tough challenge, but Bitcoin was there for me, and I was inspired.
I think the way you communicate has done that. Like whenever your name comes up to other Bitcoiners, to me, there always is a sense of, I was going to say a sense of awe. That was the first word, but like the way you communicate, it is really appreciated by Bitcoiners. I don't know if it's the style of communication or the messaging, the depths of some of your articles. I think there's some of us out here who read your stuff and it really seems to nourish or satisfy the soul a little bit, the way you write. So thank you, Tomer.
Oh, you're very welcome.
It really kind of it's more to me than just about money. That's what I really like about your writing.
Yeah.
Like I love the money part because it's like fixing a lot. So I'm really fascinated by that. But
for me, the journey, like what was interesting was I started writing these articles and they were at first explanations of how Bitcoin works.
Sure.
Why you should
Which
choose,
makes sense.
why you should choose Bitcoin, why it uses energy. But as I was going down this path, I started to discover like that the spiritual part of me, that aspect of me that you were just describing, presented itself, and it's like why Bitcoin is worthy of being loved, right? Or why you need Bitcoin, right? And so these much more spiritual ideas, moral ideas started to emerge, and they were very interesting essays to me.
Yeah.
Like I didn't know I was going to write them when I sat down in the morning.
You didn't.
I would surrender into. People talk about this thing called flow state, right? And I eventually, after getting started in this, I found myself in a real flow state around writing the articles in this book. They were coming fast. I wasn't going to write them in a book. I was publishing them on my Medium, and I had kind of set this target to write 2 a week, so that there would be a scale, that people could digest them. But
that's a lot of ideas.
They were coming out at like 1 a day, and it was like, well, I got to actually take a break because they're coming out too fast. People don't have the time to read them. Wow. That was the whole idea behind this. So I actually slowed myself down. But anyhow, that's kind of how these things came about. And then I reordered in the book. I re-edited them and reordered them so that they had more of a logical flow to them rather than the flow that they came out of me at in flow state. But then I was like, I guess I'm a Bitcoin writer now, and I ended up getting a job in Bitcoin as a writer and editor, and I was connecting to a lot of other people who were writing about Bitcoin. And so that was kind of the genesis of this. Was we were at the Toronto Bitcoin meetup that friends of mine, like they're all friends of mine.
Sure.
So the now friends of mine were holding, and Jesse Berger, who's another great
comedian. Jesse Berger's been on this podcast.
Yeah. So he was tormenting. He said he wanted to write a Bitcoin book for kids, but couldn't figure out what subject and how to introduce them to it. And I was like, come on, man. Bitcoin's the greatest story ever told. Like, and what you and I have been discussing on this podcast so far, the story of Bitcoin's creation, the story of Satoshi, is a superhero story. story, right? Like, here's this guy who comes in and nobody sees his face and nobody knows his name, and he has a superpower. He creates something that is supposed to be impossible to create, and it creates freedom in the world. So it's a superhero story. And the next day I sat down and I think I wrote the entire story probably in one sitting, probably in under 2 hours. And then I read it to a bunch of kids, and I reordered a couple of chapters again in this thing and polished up a little bit of wording. And it lay dormant for a while because it turns out it's really hard to buy a book, to publish a book rather. And it was hard to find. A kid's book needed great illustration.
I was just thinking the illustrations are just so...
Yeah, so I ended up partnering with Shamory. I wasn't prepared to do the effort to publish another book on my own, but they're a company that offers kids products in Bitcoin. So I said, here, you guys can have the book if you can publish it. And so they're publishing it now, and you can buy it on their website.
So you have to go to their website. I'll link to it.
I think it's available on Amazon.
Okay.
You can have a look. It's like a $15 book.
I'm going to put the names to both books in the show notes. So for anyone listening wants them.
And I've seen it, like I've read it to kids over the internet, but I've seen it read to kids in person a couple of times. And I did read it to a whole kids thing in the Madeira conference. The parents were crying and the kids were really fascinated by the book. And seeing little kids as young as 2 years old have it read to them is really warms your heart, because it's telling the story of hope to kids in a world that is going to tell them a lot of stories of hopelessness. But this is, and this begins, I won't read the whole thing, but this begins with its preface. As incredible as it may sound, this is a true story. Mm-hmm. It's not a made-up fairy tale or a fable. It really happened. It's really happening. I hope it gives you hope to realize that such extraordinary achievements as those of Satoshi Nakamoto can exist in the real world, and that we can all take part in them. Cool. So it really resonates with the kind of conversation that we've been having so far, and it's for kids, right? And like this is the kind of gift we should be giving our kids. It's like not just a world that's filled with hope, but the reason to believe that you live in a world that's filled with hope, rather than a cynical world. And I think they're getting less of that than you look at the kids programming when we were young. It was much more filled with hope. Sesame Street was like it wasn't the world is an unjust place and everyone's going to be exploited and we need to protest. It was people of middle means and even lower income means just living life and enjoying life together with.
Growing up in Mississauga in the 1980s for me, like late 70s, 80s, that was like, we didn't lock our door. The bike was on, like, it was just that era. Like, I'm Gen X, I guess. And that was just the most beautiful era. Like, it was amazing. I feel like it was a gift. Looking back, I feel like it was a gift compared to today.
Yeah, no, it was absolutely a time of hope, and it kind of turned for reasons we don't really have time to go into. But wanting to give that sense of hope back. And I think Bitcoiners do have that sense of hope through and through. And that's why I wanted to give this to Bitcoiners who are having kids and looking to share that excitement and enthusiasm in a kid's format. So like all the sentences in here are really short. They use language that kids can understand. And I think by the time a kid is maybe 12 or 14 years old, they'll find the language in here too simplistic.
So if I get back to that of like, how does somebody step into the world of Bitcoin and do more? I like your analogy there. I didn't think of it, that Bitcoin's like a company and you could be a shareholder of the company by owning some Bitcoin, and then you can do stuff kind of for the company, for yourself, and that's how you're supporting it. So is that how you stepped into Bitcoin more and more, by writing? Like this was I'm just thinking to somebody out there who's like, I love this thing. I want to dive into the world more. I don't know how to. That was your entry? Because I feel like the books then have opened other doors to you over the next few years. I think other things.
Yeah, other things came. A movie came, then another movie came.
That's right. That's right. So, the movie's incredible. Holy smokes. You've done a lot.
Yeah.
Holy shit.
Well, I got on this path that I had flow state on.
Yeah.
I was very productive in, and people came to me and they said, will you write about this? And one thing led to another, and one thing led to a book, one thing led to another book, one thing led to a movie, one thing led to a job. So opportunities started to open up.
So it was just by putting yourself out there, the opportunities then arrived back to you? Would that be one way to phrase it?
That Bitcoin hive mind with all these other neurons in it, many of them reached out and said, oh, I'd like to connect with you. I have a need if you can.
So maybe the message is just don't be shy. Like if this is something inside of you, express it.
Yes.
And maybe find the means of express.
express what your towering strength is, what your calling. Like there's some sense of a calling and purpose that you probably have with respect to Bitcoin. It's probably not writing for the overwhelming majority of people listening, and yourself as well, but it's something. And if you can recognize what that is and then completely surrender into it and trust that you doing what you're passionate about and what you feel your calling is will lead to good outcomes, and you're not second guessing yourself all the time, you're not worried about time running out for you, you're just doing with love what you're meant to do, then good things ought to happen to you. They may be small, but you may then realize I'm happier doing something small than being miserable trying to do something big and competing in the rat race and chasing something.
But they probably compound too, though. They might be small at first.
Sure.
But they could compound.
Yeah, listen, I think everybody's journey is different. Like I'm friends with the artist Fractal and Crypt, and he started making Bitcoin sculptures because he was moved by the beauty of Bitcoin. And eventually he's selling some of these sculptures for hundreds of thousands of dollars because other people appreciate that beauty and want to own something that is an expression of the beauty of Bitcoin that he's managed to capture in a way that I don't really think any other Bitcoin artist has. But there's lots of other Bitcoin artists who are making a living. And for me, I really I think the irony here is you do what you love rather than what you think makes money. And if you do what you love, you'd be surprised that people appreciate love and they see it in something, and they will sometimes pay you money for it if it's something that can be sold to them. But the satisfaction of doing something that is fulfilling in and of itself. So I'm not saying you have to quit your job, but if there's something that you feel you want to do for Bitcoin, whether it's run a podcast or teach about it or write some code or there's so many different things that people can do for Bitcoin, but that's their hobby, their towering strength. Like bring Bitcoin in line with your hobby, with your calling, with your passion, and you'll find that you're getting a satisfaction and reward from it that money can't buy. And maybe it'll also lead to some more money, but you do have to surrender into Bitcoin, right? If you want Bitcoin to take care of you, you have to get Bitcoin. Like if you want Bitcoin, then
so is that what that means when you say surrender into Bitcoin, to fully understand it? Or
I think everyone's got their own journey, right? But it's to not resist it, right? It's to not, like, there's all these people who are outside. Which is what most people do. Yeah, there's all these people who are outside the system who are resistant, and they're like, yeah, but. If you hear yourself saying yeah, but, try to flip to turn the table and say, okay, forget the yeah, but the government will try to stop it. Like, why can't the government stop it? And what if, therefore, the government doesn't stop it? What then, right? So forget all your worries about, but the bank doesn't want me to do it. Like, okay, but what if you do it anyways, right? But what if it keeps going anyways? What if it goes to $1 million? What if because it's going to do all of these things. Like I remember when I first go back to the beginning of this conversation, when I first heard about Bitcoin, this friend who introduced me to it, I was like on the phone with him every day when I was commuting back and forth from work, trying to talk about it. I said, so there's only 21 million of these things? Like to real estate, like the real estate conversation came up, like, aren't there a few 100 million homes in the world? Doesn't that mean that one of these things is going to be worth 10 homes? And even if it's not, like, doesn't mean one of these things is going to be worth a home.
Your whole world starts just blowing up.
Yeah, so you start asking these what ifs, and remarkably, like, Bitcoin keeps making all these what ifs realities, right? Like, what if Bitcoin hits $100,000? Yeah, it has. What if Bitcoin can't be stopped by the governments? Yeah, it can't. What if there's this movement that all the world's governments are about to acknowledge its existence and utility as money and not be able to resist using it themselves? Now we're getting into a realm of something really fascinating. So I think wherever you are, it's important that you know what you want to do with it and not let naysayers around you or the old institutions around you prevent you from fully surrendering into the future that's coming. I saw this happen with the internet. I was working at a newspaper company, and I saw the internet coming, and the newspapers resisted it and fought it and tried to pay lip service to it, but didn't really surrender into the internet. They were always trying to fight it, and they were destroyed by it. Right? Like that's
a good analogy. They didn't surrender into what was happening. They fought it, and in that fight, they ultimately got destroyed because they couldn't adapt. Because if they accepted what was going on, they could have adapted early and ridden into the wave.
The early adapters could have been winners, right?
Yeah.
They could have embraced user-generated content rather than resist. Like there was a very explicit attitude at these newspaper companies. They said there are readers and there are writers.
Oh, really?
And those readers are going to read what we write. I'm not interested in reading what they write. They're not going to write, and so even just putting comments on newspaper article websites was like a big deal.
Was it?
And then of course Twitter exists and it's all user-generated
Blew it
content.
all up, yeah.
YouTube is all user-generated content.
Yeah.
And it has a mass network of people and it became a technology utilization thing. And
so the ground up overwhelmed the newspapers just as the ground up of the financial aspects of Bitcoin will overwhelm the banks
and the government. Like this is the big, that's why this is such a revolutionary change. It's changing our systems of government, not through the means that they change. Like there's a process in the constitution of every country to amend the constitution of that country. It's a very slow process, but the constitutions aren't being honored anymore, and there's all this corruption in politics. And Bitcoin just says, okay, I'm not interested in any of those things. I don't care about the government. I am self-governing. I've got my rules.
Self-sovereignty.
Yeah, and anyone who opts into my rules operates according to my rules, and no government can stop it. And so it's a whole new set of rules that are in perfect alignment with rights-respecting nations. But lo and behold, where you see the friction, it's because the nations are themselves violating their constitution. They're violating the rights of their citizens. And Bitcoin kind of shines a bright light on it and says, well, if people are allowed to be free to use whatever they want as their own money, and the government shouldn't be issuing money and inflating the supply and debasing people's wealth and all this kind of stuff and respecting property rights, then why would you have a problem with me? Why would you have a problem with me, Bitcoin?
Then from the bottom up, what does Bitcoin do to nations? Because nations are built on the money they're able to print largely. Like if there are...
Well, they're not. And I think this is another myth.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
We have come to believe that because it's been true for our whole lives. But Canada didn't come into existence because the Bank of Canada was brought into existence and printed money. Yeah. Canada came to existence because pioneers, and pilgrims came over and they took a desolate, barren frontier, and the same is true of the United States.
Started building.
And they started building. They were trapping, they were hunting, they were farming, they were constructing, they were learning, they were free, and then they had a revolution against their oppressive king to rid them of their 1% tax, 2% tax on tea, whatever. Like it just seems so
shocking.
So bizarre. But this is it. Like Canada was not built, and the United States was not built on the seigniorage right of a central government. It was built by individuals. Well, I think it brings down the nanny state to it brings the state down to a reasonable, rational, consensual level, right?
Okay.
The state has, first of all, tried to solve problems that can't be solved at the state level, right? Like, I love my kids and I know them and I can take care of them. Yeah. The state doesn't love my kids.
It tries to handle all of education, it tries to handle all of the healthcare aspects, all of the food industry stuff, all of it.
So it's gotten into a business that's none of its business, right? And the truth is, it's our, like, my kids' health is my business. Yeah. My health is my business. And I'm not saying it's my P&L statement. It's like, it's of concern to me, and I have a mind, and I need to exercise my mind to understand what's going on in the world and to make the best decisions for myself. Yeah. And those are different decisions than what's best for you and yourself in many instances, right? Like, I should be a writer. You should be doing what you're doing. The government shouldn't be telling us all what to do and then playing games and picking industries that are winners and industries that are losers. Yeah, like
so it shrinks it's going to force the shrinkage then.
Yeah, it's going to take the teeth, because the teeth of the government, the power is the money print.
Is the money?
Right? Like,
that's the better way to say
by
it.
Seizing, is the violation of monetary independence of the individual. Right? We're going to take your money through taxation. We're going to spend it in certain places. We're going to counterfeit it by printing other amounts. So they're violating this principle of what good money should be.
Violation.
Bitcoin makes it impossible for them to practice that violation.
They have to. The government has to shrink. It can't violate it anymore. To support itself. It
has to do what people consent to it doing, and it's not this majority rules thing, because majority rules is mob rule, right? It's like, well, the majority wants to oppress the minority, and
I think we've seen that.
Yeah. So Bitcoin said, well, no, that's not the way things work. The way things work is every individual is a minority, and every individual's rights are protected, and let them do with their money as they decide to do. In a non-violent way, right? Bitcoin is this. The last chapter in this book is why Bitcoin is a movement of peace, and a lot of it comes down to it's a purely voluntary system, and if you want to use it, then you connect to this network of other people who believe in voluntary exchange of mutually agreed upon terms. And if you don't, we can just leave you in peace. You can go and do your thing, and we'll do our thing, but you can't destroy our system. You can't penetrate our system. And so that it is this shield. It is this force.
And I can see that happening to myself a little bit. Like I'm just a little bit more often using Nostr.
Yeah.
I'm a little bit more into this other world. I'm easing into it. Like I find myself, I can't really pull myself away from Twitter because like it's fun to see what's going on. It's like the arena of just chaos.
Yeah, I'm making an effort.
Yeah, but I can see it in my own behavior. I'm like, I am checking Nostr and checking that world and even participating in just a little bit more.
And listen, I different people judge this differently. People are more like, I'm actually not that radical, as crazy as I am. I'm like, I grew up in this.
You're crazy in a nice sort of way.
I grew up in this fiat world, and I like many of the accoutrements and benefits of fiat. I like to travel to the Caribbean and take cruises with my wife and all that kind of stuff. And I still do that. I'm not like, oh, this is some kind of corrupt. Like, there are nice benefits to this world, and I want to preserve them, and I want to exercise them for myself. I'm not telling you need to go on the same cruise, right? Like, there's all these choices, and everyone can make their life decisions according to what their means are, their abilities are, but we take away with Bitcoin the ability of some third party, whether it's a powerful bank or a powerful government to take away from those people the freedom to do with their money what it had the potential to do. Right? And if you want to buy nice makeup and a nice outfit, you can do that. And if you want to give it all to charity and help starving kids in Africa, you can do that too. You're not relying on the government to make these choices of what people should and shouldn't do, and then execute poorly on it because it's not their money and it's not their competency and it's way too much to take on.
It's a beautiful kind of movement. Yeah.
No, I think
kind of unleashes, like to me, it's like it unleashes global genius. It's like everybody has a bit of genius in them in one area. And a lot of that's been hidden because you've been forced to take a job in finance because of the salary in order to pay your student debt.
How many people became either consultants or bankers because that's where the money was? Yeah. Do you think anybody wants to be a consultant?
Yeah.
Like it's like, oh, what do you want to be when you grow up? I want to be a consultant. I want to spend short stints.
I've played a role.
I want to travel.
My previous lives are in these roles. And I'm like, you don't want that. You don't want that.
Like you want to be an astronaut. You want to be a sports star. You want to be a poet, artist, a comedian, an actor. You want to do something beautiful and creative with your life when you ask kids. Maybe some kids are like...
So the power of this, if it unleashes global genius at the individual level and that compounds, it's kind of interesting to see what happens over the next 5, 10, 15, 20, 50 years.
Yes. It's a revolution, right?
It's really... Because like if I look at these books in front of me, these beautiful books in front of me, the kids book and your Why Bitcoin book, they wouldn't exist to me at this moment without Bitcoin. And then where is Tomer going to be like in 10? It's going to be very interesting to me to talk to you in 10 years. Because 10 years from now, if this is the fruits of your labor right now, and more than this, the movie and everything, what are the fruits of your labor going to represent in 10 years? And what impact will the fruits of your labor have on the rest of humankind in 10 years? Like it's going to be really interesting.
That's why when I reflect on all of this stuff, both for myself and others, I'm like inspired and terrified at the same time.
Yeah, it is.
And I'm not terrified because I think something terrible is going to happen.
No.
I'm terrified because I think something so profound.
Yeah, it feels
like
that
I'm
way.
involved in something so profound and so important. And who am I and who are we? But this is a peaceful revolution, right? It's not a bloody revolution. It's a peaceful revolution, but it's a revolution against all these institutions that are very powerful and very forceful and very in control of the world right now.
And it's bringing justice back. That word you seem to use a lot.
Yeah.
Justice.
Yeah, I think people say, how do you respond to the claim that Bitcoin is just money? And I say, well, yes, and fiat is unjust money, right? Like there's a justice in this thing that people deserve justice, right? Like our system is, the American Declaration says with freedom and justice for all, right? Is that, and justice for all. It's such a famous saying. And yet we live in a world that we don't have justice for all. We have all kinds of covert and hidden injustices masquerading as benevolence, not as just, well, sometimes they use the term social justice, which is a different form of injustice.
Almost like a peaceful justice that it's bringing back.
Bitcoin is bringing back this acknowledgement that individuals should be allowed to make decisions about their own lives for themselves, and that there shouldn't be some super powerful entity composed of other human beings that makes decisions on their behalf. Right. And like, I mean, I've had these conversations many times in my life. Like, people say, well, you got to trust the government to do this because you can't trust people. I'm like, who is the government if it's not people, right? Yeah. So like, you're giving people undue amounts of power. And if you don't trust that people can be trusted with power, you're creating your own worst nightmare in giving all the power to a handful of people in a very hierarchical, in a very hierarchical organization that enforces things through violence, right? Like, the government enforces through the threat of violence, like pay your taxes or we'll send armed men to your house to collect it and or garnish your wages. And if you try to keep the money away from us, then the guns are coming out, right? Like,
pay your property taxes or we'll take your house.
And I'm not saying that everyone who enters government is this like mad fascist.
There's an operator of that system.
They exist within a system that is ultimately a system of having a monopoly of violence over the population. And so sooner or later, these problems confront themselves, and over the course of generations, people forget where Canada was founded. Like, wasn't it founded because we had the ability to print money? And when you think of that, like, what's it betraying? It betrays the fact that you acknowledge that money printing is the source of power that the government has. And so now you either opt and say, okay, well, they should have that power, and we'll continue to surrender that power to them, or I want to take that power away from them. And then that's where this very famous quote by Hayek comes in, which is, we shall never have a sound money again unless by some strange roundabout sly roundabout way, we're able to take it from them. And this is it, right? We're taking that power back, not to abuse it ourselves against some other people, but to provide equality and justice for all.
And I think that goes back to why it's so important to me. My father sang the wrong song when he was, I guess, this was the 1950s, and was put in jail, and then he couldn't leave the country at the time. He's
for singing a song.
Yeah, he was Croatian. He was singing a Croatian song, and the country was Yugoslavia at the time. Right. And they put him in jail. And then after he got out of jail, I think it was 2 weeks in jail. My aunt was in jail for 4 months for exchanging Yugoslavian dinars in the 1980s for German marks, because people were trying to protect their purchasing power. And she was at the market selling eggs, but on the side, she was doing the money exchange, right? It's just natural human behavior. She was thrown in jail for 4 months. My dad then couldn't get a passport to try to travel and try to leave the country. So he had to escape the country and declare refugee status. I think it was in Austria, and then through Germany on a boat to Canada, and got to Canada. So like, for me, just to go back to your earlier point, that everybody has why it's important to them. And my aunt, I went to that market with my aunt. So I saw who she was and how she hustled to support her family and stuff. And to think that she was thrown in jail for doing that, I'm like, it seems kind of
extreme.
Wild.
Right. Like, This is where, you'll use the word betray again, this is where the government betrays their corruption when they say it's a crime to try to use currency that's not issued by us.
Yes.
Right? That's what you just said. She spent 4 months in jail for using money that wasn't issued by them. This is where their power comes from. They want the power to control spending.
An old lady, 4 months.
An old lady, 4 months for doing what? Like spending the money to buy eggs, right? So it's like and that's kind of the extreme, and we've seen waves of extreme government abuse come through the West as well lately, right? Europe's really still apparently in a pretty bad state. What happened here in Canada throughout the COVID demonstrations, the trucker protest,
and that's why when I saw some of that, then I have flashbacks to some of my family's history, and I'm like, hold on. Don't really like the trends that I'm seeing right here. I know some of this stuff.
This was the movie Bitcoin is Generational Wealth. It's these sorts of family memories that inspired that movie. Like Louis Liu, who is a Taiwanese venture capitalist who was reading some of my writing, reached out to me and said, I want you to write an article on Bitcoin being generational wealth. my family had all of their wealth seized by communist China in 1948. And I view Bitcoin as this escape that I can build a fortune and leave it to my future generations to use responsibly rather than to be seized by abusive governments. And I was like, okay, this is a really interesting topic, but how the heck am I supposed to, like, Bitcoin was 13 years old at the time. It wasn't even one generation old. How am I supposed to write about Bitcoin? And then I had family tell me a similar story, how they left Europe in 1948 because of the Nazis and the oppression. And then some of them were in concentration camps and were liberated, and they came over to a better world in the West. And it occurred to me in the shower one day, well, you know what, like you can go back in time to 1948 and show how the abuse of money led to the collapse of the world in 1948, because that's a big part of the contribution. And then that the world recovered, and now the world is in dire straits again. And we're facing collapse, but why stop there? Why not go forward now and project out into the future what Bitcoin makes possible? And so I ended up writing this article, Bitcoin is Generational Wealth. And when I first read it, I was like, oh, this would be so much better as a narrated movie with visuals. And so I reached out to Lewis, and I think he was prepared to pay me for writing the article. I said, can you put the money into producing a film? And I had just met a director at the Toronto Bitcoin meetup, the same one where I was talking to Jesse at, and he was looking for something to work on in Bitcoin. And so we hooked up, and he said, we just need an editor. And then the next week at the Bitcoin meetup, an editor shows up at the very last minute. Like, we're doing an introductory circle talking about ourselves, and one guy shows up at the last minute and says, I'm an editor, I work at, I can't remember what TV station he worked at, and it was like, okay, so
came together.
Like, the universe brought me the topic, I wrote on it, then it brought me the director, then it brought me the editor, and it brought me the money. And so it was like, this is to the point of, if you surrender completely into this thing, a beautiful thing happens. And that movie I still get comments on it.
Wasn't it played at the beginning of the Canadian Bitcoin conference?
Yeah, they played
years ago.
Yeah, I gave the keynote speech.
Okay,
and so I spoke for 15 minutes about Bitcoin, and
I think I walked in the room like halfway through your talk, so I saw it.
Yeah, so it was played at the beginning of there, and it's got a few 100,000 views on YouTube and another few 100,000 views on Twitter, and I keep getting people telling me, "Wow, this is like the best movie about Bitcoin ever," and it brings me
I'll have to dig it up and link it to the show notes too, so I'm going to do all of that.
Yeah, it's like it's under 15 minutes.
Yeah, it's great.
And but it was also controversial at the time, because I got a lot of very negative feedback, including from my own wife and kids.
Okay.
Like, how dare you say that Bitcoin's going to build this future, right? Like, you're predicting this utopian future where there's no war, and kids focus on their towering strength rather than their oppressed, and housing is abundant and affordable, and the environment is clean, and energy is abundant and affordable. Like, how dare you make these predictions? You don't know that Bitcoin's going to do this. So there were some people who were pretty upset. I mean, there were lots of people who were like, "You've moved me to tears. This is why I Bitcoin. I know that this is the future, and thank you for showing it, expressing it, because I can now connect with my senses. I can see it rather than I have to think about it. So you've concretized an idea." That's when I realized, I'm making art, concretizing ideas. But that sense of controversy is in there. And the movie was made in 2021. It's not 2025. It's early 2025. So it's over 3 years old. And it stood the test of time really well. In some sense, it's quite unfortunately, because when it says like the year is 2021 and the looming specter of totalitarianism is upon us again, it's like, oh my God, yes. Like, the fascism, totalitarianism, authoritarianism, whatever you want to call it, is only getting worse, right? Like, even the people who are coming in and preaching for smaller government are doing it by being very authoritarian. And so,
but some of the things like energy abundance, you can kind of see it extrapolated out a bit better right now. Like before, 3 years ago, I couldn't really see it.
Yes.
Now I can see it a little bit more with AI and the tech companies, nuclear power. You're like, oh, wait a second here. Bitcoin miners serving their need into this space.
Well, one interesting thing, this is probably not speaking to all the listeners of your podcast, but to those who kind of do want to surrender into Bitcoin, there's a lot of, like, I really expressed, and this isn't meant to be boastful. It's like when I surrendered into Bitcoin, I gave a lot of myself to those energies of exploring things like the energy abundance of Bitcoin, the future of Bitcoin, is it alien technology, is it conscious? And I've got all these deep takes on Bitcoin that I think people will find interesting. You may not end up agreeing with my hypothesis on a lot of them, but if like for people who are intrigued by this far out science fiction, deep philosophical stuff about Bitcoin, that's really where my passion lies right now. And yes, there's lots of articles to read. There's podcasts about them. And I am doing on Twitter Spaces every Sunday morning at 8 a.m. Eastern. This 2-hour space is called Bitcoin Philosophy.
Okay, so you do those spaces. That's something you're doing constantly. Okay.
Yeah, I'm trying to do it every week, except for weeks where I'm on vacation. So I take a few weeks off here and there. But it's turning out to be really interesting spaces where I'm trying to hold it as a Socratic dialogue rather than as a lecture of me. So people can talk to me and we can talk about topics, and we try to have a focal topic every week we do it. And I know people are getting good value out of it. So for people who are like, I want to listen in on, or I even, and maybe potentially participate in philosophical discussions about Bitcoin to help me understand it better, to help me understand what I actually think about it. Like, because when you talk and write, as I was saying, I discovered a lot about myself in writing this. I discovered a lot about what I think. I learned a lot from writing. So if you want to learn more about Bitcoin, there's no better way. Like, you can consume content, but if you actually engage in content and create content, you really find out what you're thinking, and you may find out what you're excellent at and what may not be a strength of yours at the same process.
And your Twitter handle is just Tomer Strolight, your name, all one word, right?
Yeah.
Okay, at Tomer Strolight on Twitter.
Yeah.
And then if they wanted to find anything else for you, I think you have a URL in the bio of your Twitter handle that goes somewhere. Does that link to a bunch of your stuff or no? So is there another website?
So there's a link in my bio to be able to buy this book from blurb.com. I probably need to update my bio.
I'm just trying to think where to direct everyone to find it. I'll put links in the show notes of this.
So like my Medium is where a lot of my original content
and that's not linked off Twitter in any way?
Probably not.
Okay.
No, so maybe we'll fix some of this up.
Okay.
I worked at Swan for 3 years as editor-in-chief and chief writer, I suppose. And I have a lot of articles that are published on the Swan blog. So swan.com/blog. If you scroll down a little bit and you search for Tomer Strolight, you'll find a lot of articles. And I do have some interesting like political philosophy articles there, and articles about why Bitcoin is hard to change, and articles about Bitcoin as a brand. There's a lot of really interesting stuff.
And the one on the neurons and the way...
That's on Medium. That's on Tomer. There's a collection.
That's the first one I'm going back to.
Deep takes on Bitcoin. I've written periodically for Bitcoin Magazine. There's a few interesting articles there about the block size wars and about the zen of Bitcoin. And
what about the meetup? Are you going to a meetup in Toronto?
You know what? Right now, I don't have a a that I go to regularly.
Okay. Is there one in the Toronto?
There is. There's a Telegram group called Ontario Bitcoin Meetups, and maybe I'll find the Telegram link and send it to you afterwards. And they're holding periodic Bitcoin meetups in Toronto, but also in like Waterloo, and also in Guelph, and also in Niagara region. So for people who want to find those local meetups, I haven't been able to make it out to many of them lately for reasons that are probably poor excuses, but like this meetup where all this stuff was born, and where we first screened Bitcoin as generational wealth outdoors on a projection TV, that was like a really special and magical thing to me that I don't know that I'll ever be able to recreate. The people who ran it at their business that they ended up selling and moving to Costa Rica. So it's kind of it's very sweet memories.
Yeah,
it's cool. It's bittersweet that I can't keep going to that Bitcoin meetup every other week because it was really special.
Well, Tomer, thank you for this. Really appreciate you coming in. We dragged you out to Oakville, so I feel very fortunate to bump into you where we met, and then for you to agree to come out here. I really, really appreciate this. You didn't have to come all the way out here, and I just love this kind of conversation. And there's very few people that I can have this kind of conversation with. I can barely
feel crazy.
And not feel crazy.
Validated your insanity.
You really did. You really did. So I feel bad. I'm going to tell my brother right after this. Told you I wasn't totally.
I told you I'm not
maybe
crazy.
I'm a little bit crazy, but
I think the thing with craziness craziness. Everybody knows the book Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance by Robert Pirsig. He wrote another book, his second one, called Lila.
Okay.
And in it, he explores this notion of insanity as really holding a very different set of beliefs than what the majority has consensus on, right? So it's like, and he points out that from time to time, the majority consensus changes, right? Like, we're living in a secular society that views being deeply religious as being insane, right? And yet, 100, 200 years ago, everyone was deeply religious, even during the Age of Reason.
Sure.
And you would have been viewed insane in some respects for not believing in God. So something happened where the consensus shifted, and what was crazy became sane, and what was sane became crazy. And so I think, I think it's insane to think that the government should print money, that the government should be in control of money. That's an insane and destructive notion to humanity. And I appreciate that that's the overwhelming consensus, and that having this alternative view is deemed insane by most people. Like, well, who do you think should issue the money if not the government? Nobody. A protocol. Are you fucking crazy? Like, a protocol should issue the money? What do we do when there's an emergency and it needs to be changed? It's like, nothing. Well, that, so
it's funny you say that. One of our best business mentors, an older gentleman, told us this one quote. I think it's a quote by Nightingale Conant, maybe, that basically said, if you just choose the opposite or go the opposite of direction of the masses in almost any arena, it's usually the right move.
If you could tell what the opposite, if you can tell what the opposite is, because sometimes, like, people say the opposite of a cat is dog. They're not the opposites. They just, in cartoons, they fight. But it's hard to tell what the opposite,
what the consensus is that you're trying to go against.
And seeing what the opposite, right? Because easily someone could say, well, the opposite of the government being in charge of the money is a company should be in charge of the money, or or some not-for-profit should be in charge of the money, or something else, right? And like the revolutionary,
distilling it down to like a principle-based truth is tough.
Because what is actually the view? It's that nobody should be like. The real error is somebody should be in charge of the money, and the response is no, nobody should be in charge of the money, and that's where Bitcoin fixes that thing, because nobody's in charge of Bitcoin. It's like, and people say, well, that's anarchy, and it's like, well, let's be careful about the use of the word. Anarchy just means rules without rulers. It doesn't mean no rules. And so Bitcoin is rules without rulers. And it's very different from what most people deem anarchy to be, which is people running around in the streets with mallets, bashing, and guns, shooting each other and bashing each other in the head. That's no rules. That's the law of the jungle. Bitcoin is not the law of the jungle. Bitcoin is the law of mutually agreed upon exchange between two people, where violence and force doesn't get you your way.
That was a perfect way to end.
All right.
Thank you so much.
You.
Really, really appreciate that.
Yeah, my pleasure.